All the cool Bible translations want to be literal nowadays. But what does literal even mean? The New American Standard Bible has called itself the most literal English Bible. The Christian Standard Bible, which I also appreciate, calls itself highly literal. My beloved English Standard Version is essentially literal. The impression is alive and well out there in Bible reader land, in which I was recently dubbed a low-ranking earl, that literal Bibles give you what God said, and that not literal Bibles give you what people think he said. Literal is a label every Bible wants to claim, at least a little. Even those who made the not-so-literal New Living Translation, an heir of Kenneth Taylor's Living Bible paraphrase, said that they, quote, translated as simply and literally as possible, when that approach yielded an accurate, clear, and natural English text. Some take literalness to an extreme, however. Young's literal translation, produced around the time of the American Civil War, represented that extreme for a long time. But recently, the Literal Standard Version revised Young's work. The LSV calls itself the most literal translation of the Holy Bible, with significant improvement over previous literal translations. But again, when you really dig into literalness, what do you find? What does it even mean for a translation to be literal? I once sat down with a fellow editor at Lexham Press, my respected friend and consummate word nerd, Doug Mangum, whose name shows up on all kinds of cool Bible study resources that you should have, such as the Lexham Theological Word Book and the Lexham Context Commentary, on which I also got to work. We sat down to define the very concept of literal Bible translation, and we found that it was a very challenging task. That challenge is baked into the word. As one student of evangelical Bible reading, Brian Malley, has pointed out, literal is itself a metaphor. It compares careful attention to the straightforward details of a text to minute examination of just a letter at a time. Literal comes from the Latin word for letter. But that isn't maybe much help because it just pushes the question back. How do you know when your translation is straightforward? Because Doug and I knew that there is no heaven-sent definition of literal Bible translation, we did a little working backwards. What do people usually mean when they say literal? There are so many elements of language, from verb tense to noun class to preposition placement. You just can't match them all across two languages. Something has to go. You have to prioritize. These ideas helped us loosely rank the elements of language in order of importance for literality. It seemed to us, for example, that three things were probably at the top of people's literal list. First, consistent word choice, often called concordance. Second, maintenance of original language word order. And third, equivalence of grammatical categories. Nouns in the Hebrew are nouns in the translation, for example. This is what people appear to mainly mean by literal. Our theory was that a literal translation, in order to deserve the label, would just have to reflect as many forms as possible in the original languages before it started sounding like something other than English. But how far can you stretch English toward Hebrew and Greek before it breaks? My work with Doug helped confirm for me that it's impossible to be consistently literal. So though literal renderings are useful, they aren't somehow intrinsically morally superior to non-literal renderings. It depends on the circumstance. If they were morally superior, God would have made it possible to be perfectly literal. I'll briefly take each of the three principles that I just mentioned and show why they don't and can't really work, not consistently. First, literal translations pick one English word to stand for each Hebrew and Greek word. A literal translation sets up a series of conventional, I might even call them traditional, matches between the source language and the target language. And with many words, you can achieve a high degree of consistency doing this, like the Greek word ekklesia, which is almost always translated church, as in, I will build my church. But there are a few places where sticking with that choice, church, just wouldn't work. The Ephesian riot in Acts 19 provides two great examples. The city was filled with the confusion, and they rushed together into the theater, dragging with them Gaius and Aristarchus, Macedonians who were Paul's companions in travel. Now some cried out one thing, some another, for the ekklesia was in confusion, and most of them did not know why they had come together. Later in the story, the town clerk says to the rioters, "You have brought these men here who are neither sacrilegious nor blasphemers of our goddess. If therefore Demetrius and the craftsmen with him have a complaint against anyone, the courts are open, and there are proconsuls. Let them bring charges against one another. But if you seek anything further, it shall be settled in the regular ecclesia." Clearly, ecclesia here means assembly, not church. In one case, the assembly is a riot. In the other, it's some kind of public governmental hearing. Now, maybe your church is like a riot, full of confused screamers, or maybe it's like a boring county council meeting, but church is just not the right translation of ecclesia in these places in Acts 19. Individual words have multiple uses or senses. Alternatively, of course, you could stick with assembly everywhere in the New Testament or use William Tyndale's famous choice of congregation. But then you'd get sentences like, "So the assembly throughout all Judea and Galilee and Samaria had peace and was being built up." But it's not an assembly. All those Christians in all those areas never assembled as one. It's the church throughout that whole region that had peace. Okay, so you can't be perfectly consistent on the first aspect of literalness. How about the second, word order? I'll be super brief here. Sticking with Hebrew and Greek, word order actually is what most translations do most of the time, at least in English. But trying for perfect consistency would break English. Postpositive particles, for example, like to show up as the second word in a Greek clause, but they have to be the first in English. This is the word order of 1 Corinthians 7:1, and look at the placement of the simple conjunction but. About but the things of which you wrote. English absolutely requires but to be first, but about the things of which you wrote. English is from the same language family as Greek, so you really can often keep the word order as you travel from one language to another in translation. But you can't be perfectly consistent. Third, maintenance of grammatical categories, nouns to nouns, verbs to verbs, etc. I was in 1 Corinthians 7 a moment ago, and I decided that I'd read through this passage in Greek until I came across an instance in which translation from one language to another requires changing grammatical categories. It took me 3 words. In Greek, the things of which you wrote is actually a relative pronoun, but not a single major translation, not a literal one, not a not-so-literal one, uses a relative pronoun in English to translate this relative pronoun in Greek. They all go for a noun instead, things or matters or questions. That's how we'd say the same thing in English. Now, about the things about which you wrote. Here we go again. You can't translate the Bible for more than a minute without being required to violate all 3 top priorities of literalness. So maybe they're useful. Maybe they're valuable, and I think they are, but they just can't be utterly required. The literaler than thou game that so many people like to play as they fight about Bible translations, I'm sorry, but it's true, betrays a misunderstanding of what translation is and can be. Some people really do talk as if literal Bible translation is the only thing standing in between us and total Bible anarchy, every translator doing that which is right in Eugene Peterson's eyes. I don't think that. I see value in multiple kinds of Bible translations. The value in a highly literal one, like Faithlife's own Lexham English Bible, is probably mainly for those who've taken at least a little biblical Hebrew or Greek. God didn't structure languages to allow for easy, perfect translation that even a dumb old computer could do. He gave us a situation in which humans need to decide how literal to be in any given place. You and I have to trust someone else to translate the Bible for us. That's the sobering truth. Doug and I ended up listing out 13 dimensions of literality that we felt had to be weighed in the balances with each other, but again, couldn't be observed with perfect consistency. Ironically, perhaps, considering that I'm a well-known opponent of the doctrine of King James onlyism, I think the King James Version provides a better way forward than the escalating arms race of literalism. I think the King James established an excellent tradition, one worth maintaining, a tradition of basically literal Bible translation that nonetheless self-consciously refuses the ideal, or rather the idol, of perfect literal consistency. The King James translators specifically deny in their preface that their goal is to use the same English word for each Hebrew and Greek word. They say that they should have the right to say journeys in one place and travels in another. They say that to mince the matter by insisting on perfect consistency would savour more of curiosity than wisdom. They violated all the principles of literalness that I've mentioned in this video many times. And guess what? The Christian church in English-speaking lands did okay. There is no clear definition, no bright boundary around the concept of literal. It's a direction, it's a tendency, it's a translator's tool. But it's very bad as a universal law because nobody quite agrees on what it means, and because even the parts people kind of agree on don't always work.